Hi. Was I right? Was it a good movie? I knew it. All right, so without further ado, since it's late, I'm going to bring up the panel. First, I'm going to introduce the moderator, Rachel Bachman. She is a sports writer for the Wall Street Journal, and she will introduce the rest of the panelists. Come on up. There's a mic down there for you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for coming out tonight. How about another round of applause for this amazing film? I was just saying, it's like a history bomb going off. It's like you've just never heard a word about it. I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'll start. I'm going to do it out of order because that's how my notes are. In the middle, we have Steph Young, who's a staff writer for The Athletic, covered women's soccer for a decade, including 3 Women's World Cups. On the far end, there's Kira Tirana-Berry, a U.S. Soccer Foundation board member who's also done some work in the wrestling space, right? And a local dignitary, Kia Clark, CEO of the WNBA's New York Liberty. Thanks so much to all of you for coming out. Well, let's start with women's football. As mentioned briefly here, there's a very successful women's domestic league. It's one of the recent iterations. There have been previous attempts, the National Women's Soccer League, that is really thriving after previous leagues have failed. But with that has come some tension points along with this incredible growth. So I wanted to ask you first, Steph, about some of those tension points, and maybe we can start by talking about the Kansas City team, which has an incredible stadium story, but also, some of the growth is causing some controversy.
So first, you have a local NWSL team, if you're not aware, Gotham FC. There we go. Okay, there we go. All right, we have some Mitch Purse fans in the house or something. Yeah, all right. They're playing at Red Bull Arena. You can take the path. It's very easy. Gotham pays me nothing for this, by the way. So yeah, I think there's a lot of money coming into women's soccer, but the classic aphorism, more money, more problems. FIFA is now interested in women's football because they can wring every last little drop of blood out of the turnip, which they love to do, men's or women's. They're not discriminatory there. It's the one thing they don't discriminate at. But we do have a women's soccer league that's really thriving. And I'll give you an example. Rachel mentioned Kansas City Current. They've just built their $125 million home stadium. They also got involved in an $800 million riverfront revival project as part of that stadium renovation. So you know that that's the scale of money that we're starting to talk about. And we're having investment firms coming in like Sixth Street with the Wave, that sort of thing. That's the kind of money it takes. It takes about $65 million now to kind of enter into NWSL. Theoretically, that's the floor. But in a little microcosm of what we're talking about, Kansas City Current also just announced they're charging fans $50 a game for parking. And they are charging the full, if you have a season ticket, you don't even get a discount. You just gotta pay $700 for 14 home games. This is more expensive than the Kansas City Chiefs, an NFL team, right? And so there's been a lot of uproar because in the past, women's soccer, as we just saw, has been such a niche community. We've been so underserved, and we've gone through the horrors, right, together, that it's created this sense of community that you don't find necessarily in other sports. And then to see fans who have stuck with a team or a league that has also gone through the horrors, right? The Kansas City Current are not the first iteration of women's soccer in Kansas City. They have a direct predecessor, FC Kansas City, that folded. And then there are previous women's leagues that also folded. Women's professional soccer folded in 2012, and we had WUSA, the league of Mia Hamm, Brandi Chastain. That one folded in 2003. And so women's soccer fans have been through a lot. We finally have a stable league. And what's their reward for sticking with women's soccer, for being loyal fans in the lean years when you could not find merchandise, you couldn't buy jerseys? Getting price gouged, just like men's sports. It's equality, right? And so I think there's a question here that we have to start asking ourselves. not to be too dramatic about it, but maybe there's an upcoming battle for the soul of women's sports where we can be financially successful. I'm not telling these capitalists don't go out there and make money, because money makes the game go around. You got to pay the players, you got to build facilities, you have to do marketing. You want to make money. I'm not telling you you can't, but there has to be a question that we ask here is, do we want to take on all the vices of men's sports? Do we have to follow in that path? Is that the only way to look successful? When is enough? You know, are these franchise fees for entering into the league going to skyrocket until it takes $200-300 million to come in, and the only people who can come in are the most reprehensible, richest people on earth? We already saw this happen in the Premier League, right? With Russian oligarchs, oil money. Please don't come after me, but, you know. So there are people on the stage who are maybe better positioned than I am to talk more deeply about this, but I think this is a question that we honestly should have been asking ourselves probably a good 4 or 5 years ago, and we need to be asking ourselves now as the money floods in, what do we want women's sports to look like in the future? It doesn't need to look like, you know, the embarrassing transfer fees in men's football and people spending hundreds of millions of dollars of public money on stadiums, that sort of thing. I think that there's a better way to do it. And, you know, I think there's a couple people on the stage who could maybe work on that. They're in a position to shape that future.
Yes, let's talk about the sort of the flip side of that, which is investment that can benefit teams and players, right? Because of course, increased investment often leads to a better product, which leads to more customers, which leads to more money for everyone, including the players. So, Kia, I wanted to ask you, so Title IX, as we know, was an accelerator for women's college sports. There's been a huge wave of investment across, in the W as well, in the NWSL, across women's sports. Could you talk about a few of the ways that that investment has helped benefit the Liberty specifically, from facilities to other things?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, just super, super excited to be here with all of you. That film was incredible. I have so many thoughts running through my mind right now, and I couldn't help but draw a direct parallel in what was happening in Copa71. When you talk about sponsorship and you talk about ticketing and you talk about uniforms, and you talk about stadiums and venues, and immediately, I mean, that's the answer. When you think about the Liberty being an original team in the WNBA and really suffering, almost, you know, nearly hitting rock bottom at one point after the team's sale, this historic resurgence, the turnaround of the team was really at the hands of our new ownership. So their investment, both as a benefactor, but as a thought partner in giving their mind share to us, they've done so many really, really critical decisions that have really made us, put us in the position where we are right now to grow. Specifically, I'll start with venue. You know, we just saw they put the women in the biggest stadium ever. Most WNBA teams, for the most part, we play in NBA arenas. They're quote unquote oversized arenas, and we're forced to figure out a way to fill those arenas. But moving to Barclays Center from our short stint in Westchester County was really the differential for us to actually have the opportunity to fill the arena. You know, if you only have 2,000 seats, you can only sell 2,000 seats. If you have 17,000 seats, you can get there and you could actually showcase this prominent elite product to the masses. And that was just one of the decisions that they made very early in their ownership. In the same vein, within the building, they redid an entire compound, a locker room space built for women. It was the first CapEx project that I was a part of. We actually enlisted women architects and women designers, and we built a space that was built for them and what their needs were, which was one of the first times I think that had happened. Now we have several teams who have their own complete practice facility, but right within Barclays Center, I mean, this is office space, this is hot and cold tubs, it's a weight room, it's a locker room, and it's all meant just for the New York Liberty, which was incredibly important. You know, there are so many ways that they've really poured into, not just again in money, but decisions and sharing thoughts on how we can move forward from a media standpoint. From a broadcast standpoint, making investments in our organization has really meant the difference in terms of how we can move tickets and how we can sell sponsorships.
Yeah, And of course, last season wasn't bad either on the court. Right?
Last season wasn't bad. Hopefully some of you caught up, and that investment has really translated into an attraction for elite level players. We acquired 3 All-Stars in the offseason. It was the first time in WNBA history 2 former MVPs came to one team, and we were able to go, after 21 years never being in the finals, make it back to the finals, and that's a direct correlation to players who saw what our ownership group was doing and wanted to be in New York.
Please get back Jonquel Jones, please.
JJ's back.
No, I'm a Connecticut Sun fan.
Oh, give. No. JJ's in New York.
Finals. Kira, I want to bring you in. First of all, I want to trumpet a success story that you were a part of. You also do some work in the wrestling space.
Yes.
And for those of you who don't know, a decade ago, if a girl wanted to wrestle in high school, she almost always had to wrestle on a boys' team, right? Wrestle against boys. This is not something that a lot of girls want to do, right? So some enterprising people, including yourself, decided to start a nationwide campaign to grow the number of girls' high school teams and, importantly, girls' high school state championships. And so in a decade, because of your work, we've gone from a handful of states offering state championships for girls in wrestling to about 45 states now offering them, which is an incredible success story. Yeah. So 5 years ago, I interviewed the executive director of USA Wrestling, and he said, girls wrestling is the best thing to ever happen to this sport. And he meant it. It was, really stagnant in terms of participation, and once you added in these waves of girls, it basically rescued the sport.
For the girls and the boys, I mean, we've had incredible growth. 10 years ago, there were about 10,000 girls wrestling. Last year, there were 52,000 girls wrestling across the country. That's the same number as field hockey. This year, we don't have the numbers yet, but it'll probably 60, 70,000. I mean, it's growing tremendously, and we're actually seeing the number of boys start to rise after it was going down. So it has rescued the sport, and a lot of it is our male allyship. And it's that leadership at the top, at the federation, that said, look, we're going to do this. And I got involved 10, 12 years ago, and we did set out to say, we need state championships. It's 2012. We have 3 state championships. That's ridiculous. It's 40 plus years after Title IX, and we looked at what was going on at the other sports, and we were leaving half the population out. But it took bold leadership at the top. We don't have professional leagues in the same. We are truly Olympic sport, but it's that intentionality, and that's what we're also seeing in soccer. And I, plug for the U.S. Soccer Foundation, which I'm a member of the board, and for over 15, almost 20 years now, they've had a program called Soccer for Success, and that is really looking at where all the soccer grew in this country like a donut around the inner cities, and we were missing incredible populations. And how do you bring the sport to those populations? Not to make a team or any, just so they have the benefit and the joy of playing. And we've been after that now for a number of years. And we're looking, the foundation had the benefit of starting in 1994, the last time the U.S. hosted the U.S. Men's World Cup. And they made over $50 million. I think it was the first large international event that made a profit. And the visionaries at that time turned around and put that into and created the U.S. Soccer Foundation, which is about growing it to the underserved communities. And that includes women. So we had a big program called United for Girls, invested by Dick's Sports and Adidas, and that is spent looking and studying why are girls, why do they come to play? What do they need to stay in the game? And how do we keep them from leaving? And that's a toolkit now that we're putting into place in a different way of creating a community of athletes and people who appreciate the sport. And those are young people all over the country that are also going to turn into fans and are going to put butts in the seats, whether it's in soccer, whether it's in basketball, because they're going to know that they have a role in the sport.
And that's an ongoing challenge, right? Because of this pay-for-play format of a lot of youth sports, a lot of people are frozen out, and that's an ongoing challenge for the U.S. Women's National Team as well. I noticed, talking to players who were at the recent World Cup, a number of players were on club teams because they could get scholarships, because it's so expensive to play high-level youth soccer in this country. Steph, let's talk for a second about the U.S. Women's National Team, because arguably the most famous women's national team in the world. Yeah, speaking of countries where the women win and the men don't, right?
I mean, they're going through it right now. They actually just lost to Mexico, which, talk about a reversal from, you know, a team that was forgotten to, like, has now rebuilt into a contender, although we won't go too deep into the tactics. But yeah, I mean, you can talk all you want about early investment and the world is caught up. I think that's a really tired storyline, actually. The world caught up however long ago. What we're talking about now is building. It's not about catching up. It's about who's going to build for the future. One of the arguments I hate the most in women's sports, not just soccer, is about economics. Because people like to pretend, men like to pretend, that the finances of women's sports just happen in a vacuum, and that's nature, and that's how things naturally have organized themselves. But we've seen that economic decisions are made by people. Investment is a decision that you make, someone makes in a boardroom. A person has to say, don't invest in women's sports, or do invest in men's sports. And if you walk out of this room thinking about one thing, about the finances or the economics or the growth of women's soccer or women's sports, it's that, you mentioned the word, intentionality. It has to be intentional. Someone somewhere has to make a spreadsheet. You know how you get the friend group together, but nobody actually does anything until one friend is like, give me all your availabilities. I'll put it in the spreadsheet. I'm going to tell you what time, and I'm going to put it on your Google Calendar, right? We've all experienced this, right? How many of us are the calendar friend? I see very few hands. See? Exactly. These things don't happen unless someone intentionally wants to do them. And it's so easy to block people from doing things. There's so many barriers to overcome. So you have to be so persistent. I think about this great story that Natalie Portman told, because she's an investor in Angel City FC, which is making money hand over fist. They are printing it out there.
Yes, that's the Los Angeles NWSL team,
Yes.
which has some very famous owners.
But they're making money because they invested a lot of money. But the problem was, she tells us a great story. There's a documentary about Angel City where she's exaggerating a little bit, but they were shopping this around, and they had run the numbers. They did all the little, you know, business things where you do, I don't quite know, there's probably an acronym for it, right? Where Wall Street Journal, help me out.
Making money.
Right.
Making money, yeah.
The studies that you do that show this will make money.
P&L.
Right? If you, evaluation, right, exactly. And she said they got basically like 99 no's until they got their first yes. They had the proof. They had the proof. They had done all the work. And because of people's own internal biases, they refused to believe proof, numbers that they had been given that were the same as any other business kind of study. And so I think if you walk out of here thinking about one thing, it's not that, none of this happens in a vacuum. It takes people doing the actual work, getting on the ground, making decisions to do it. And if something's not happening, it's not because women's sports are naturally inferior. That's a decision that somebody made somewhere. We just saw it in the documentary, to actively suppress women's sports.
I would be remiss if I did not bring up the story of the day, which is that Iowa supernova Caitlin Clark is going to the WNBA. She is unquestionably the most famous player in college basketball, men's or women's. If you haven't seen her, I highly recommend watching her. She's breathtaking. And she's soon going to be in your orbit. So I'm curious to ask you what kind of impact you think she's going to have in the W.
Yeah, she'll most certainly be an opponent, which is okay. I mean, Caitlin Clark is a generational talent. I think what's so beautiful about the game and the evolution of the game, and how just having a professional women's league on the basketball side in particular has grown just the skill level and ready for pro basketball. That's been happening over pretty much, probably the last 5 to 8 years, where you have players who can come in and immediately have impact. And she will have immediate impact on court, but from a commercialization standpoint, she's a showstopper. She is must-see TV. She is someone who is driving ticket sales. We're seeing it in record numbers at the collegiate level. We expect that to transfer at the pro level, and that's going to be good for all of the teams. It's going to be good for generally basketball. It's going to be great for women's sports. It's just good to see people competing. You know, Sabrina, who was just in the three-point contest against Steph Curry at the NBA All-Star Weekend, you know, she said, you know, if you can shoot, you can shoot. If you can play, you can play. And I think it's really, really inspiring for us to get to a point where the whole country is behind what is happening and wanted to see if Caitlin Clark was going to come out. And now she is. And now she'll come into this league and she'll prove herself. And at the same time, you know, the rising tide is going to lift, I think, all ships. And it's great for, you know, every single team. So we're playing Indiana on opening night.
Yes. So Indiana, so big New York connection. So Indiana Fever as the #1 pick in the draft, so it's understood they're going to pick Caitlin Clark. But before then, April 15th is the WNBA draft at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and they're actually selling tickets. So if you're lucky, you can buy one and be there in person. Thanks to all of our panelists. Thanks to all of you. Appreciate you supporting this film, and I hope you support women's sports. They're an absolute boom time right now.
Don't forget, opening night party at the Expat 64 Teeman, a couple of blocks north. Hope to see you there. Thank you all so much.